So there we go.
Okay, so yeah, tonight's topic for Princeton Agility is hidden contracts and silence agreements using systemic constellations. And we're honored to have Volker Frank join us from California. He's an organizational consultant and executive coach with 20 years of experience with constellations, and he's also a certified NLP master practitioner. He's passionate about learning about learning ways for new ways of working and leadership and engagement at every level of the organization. So yeah, we look forward to having him talk to us about systemic constellations. I've seen systemic constellations done once or twice. They can be very powerful. So I'm looking forward to this talk. And I know, Volker, you've had a ton of experience with this stuff. So welcome, sir. Turning it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. Maybe just for me to get a little bit of a sense. Who here, like either raise your hand or if your video is off, just use the little emoji, the emojis, the reaction buttons. Who here is familiar with systemic constellations, family constellations, organizational constellations, any of those? Who's come across that before and has sort of a first-hand experience? All right. So, a bunch of newbies. Good. Thank you. All right. So, in that case, let me just create a big umbrella and offer some presuppositions that will become more apparent by the time we get to the exercise, but some things that we just want to sort of presuppose. So based on our experience with this work, we're coming to the conclusion that groups, teams, departments, like social systems, develop something like a shared intelligence, a shared consciousness that is distinct and separate from every individual, and every individual contributes to whatever is captured in it. And everybody has access to it. Now, this is a different way of knowing. So this is not explicit cognitive knowledge. Just because the CFO knows some numbers doesn't mean everybody in the organization has access to that kind of knowledge. This is more about social relational information. And as a consequence, we don't recognize that information as something explicit cognitive knowledge that we process in our higher brain functions, but it happens more at the nervous system level and the way we feel. When we enter an organization, there's a certain feel to it. Sometimes we talk about it as culture, but you know, this is sort of, we have a bunch of ways of vaguely pointing in that direction. And it, you know, our emotional sense affects everything we do, every decision, who we trust, who we don't trust, where we like to go, where we stay away. And so while the information is relatively subtle, it has an outsized influence on what happens in teams and organizations. And being able to make that visible and explicit and as part of an experience can have a significant impact. So let's put this in the context of why we go to work. We essentially get paid to get stuff done, accomplish goals, achieve results. And it's in large organizations, so we are requiring collaboration, alignment with other people, making it through conflicts, differing opinions. And we have fundamentally two basic motivations. One is power, fundamentally based in fear, like I'm your boss, your promotion, your bonus, which projects you get assigned. I mean, there are a bunch of things that I can threaten you with, more or less explicit, in order to get my way. And then that's fundamentally fear-based. And then the opposite end of this, the flip side of the coin is we enroll, we engage, we convince, we align, we find shared purpose, and then we want to work together towards something that we have invested interest in. And that's the big umbrella of influence. So power or influence. And I just use influence as a label. And you could probably come up with other labels, but fear-based and outcome-oriented. And certainly in the world of Agile, most of the roles that we inhabit, either as coaches or Scrum Masters, are not invested with a lot of positional authority. So there's not a lot of power we have to yield, and we have to get very savvy about how we influence people to want to play along, to want to try things out, try something different, take some risks with something new, and make them want to follow us. So informal leadership, informal authority, based on our trust, our relationship capital, and that's the world that we tap into with this exercise that we call systemic constellations. So broadly, the way the information shows up for us organizes around two basic dynamics. Anything that increases our sense of belonging. When we chime in, we follow along, we feel so that we come together as a group. Yeah, we feel good, innocent, and we are sort of drawn into it. Anything that threatens or diminishes our sense of belonging feels uncomfortable, a little guilty maybe. Now we get careful, we're worried. And this could be, there aren't any slides, sorry. Just imagine sitting around a conference room or in a Zoom room with your team and having to go up against the majority opinion. That's kind of an uncomfortable scenario. Now we are in the minority, we're different, we are separating ourselves from the consensus. And as important as that may be for the functioning of the team and the group, to allow and include opposing voices, the people who are doing that voicing are uncomfortable. So at that level, we're constantly in conversation about the degree of belonging and how comfortable we are with being uncomfortable, how much we are willing to take risks, be courageous, or go along to get along. And here are sort of three principles of self-organization that has a major impact on how much influence we have. What's our relationship capital that we bring to decision-making and conversations. The first one is the value of our contribution. So in technology teams, there usually is, an engineer, a senior architect, someone who's extremely knowledgeable in a certain technology stack. And it's easy and common sense that their opinion would count for more or have more weight than, you know, a recent graduate from code camp who knows how to spell their name. And so we have a natural, commonsensical way of making some allowances for how to, which voices are influential. So the first one is expertise, specialized knowledge. And another dimension to that value of contribution is how long I've been with the organization or the team. What is my institutional knowledge? How much history? What have we tried? What has worked? That has value, and people who've been with organizations for a longer time generally have an easier time being heard. And the third obvious dimension of this is something like positional authority. We think of that as, you know, titles in the hierarchy. But if we start to think about it, the willingness for people to take on more responsibility, a heavier burden, yeah, the more senior you get in the organization, the more difficult your decisions, and the more sleepless nights you'll have, because, you know, this is a complicated world, and a lot of people are dependent on your decision making, and that keeps people up at night. In general, we overemphasize, yeah, because that aligns with power dynamics, and so we tend to overemphasize the third dimension. So let's remember that there's expertise and there's sort of institutional knowledge that has an influence on how much your voice is being heard and considered by everybody else. The second principle is organized around the balance of giving and taking. So if I make a lot of contributions, I work hard, I spend the weekend cleaning something up. Now I hold a special role. Yeah, if on volunteer teams, and there's always some distinction about how much people are contributing, and the people that are doing most of the work will naturally end up making more of the decisions, or if there's a disagreement, their opinion will matter more than somebody else. And so we have this implicit accounting going on about how much I am contributing in effort and work, and how much benefit I receive. And then the third dimension, or the third principle, is around stake. What's my stake in the decision or the matter at hand? If I'm only tangentially affected, I can have all the opinions in the world. Nobody will really care. However, if I'm at the center of the decision and it'll make all the difference in my life, my opinion will carry more weight. And here we get into a lot of those dynamics around say, how much belonging is organized around, say, gender or race or you know, skin color, where chances are that, you know, if you're in the wrong gender or the wrong skin color, your stake will not be appropriately honored. And that's, you know, sort of exclusions, starting with microaggressions up to downright racism or sexism. That is minimizing somebody's stake based on irrelevant criteria. Any questions so far? That was sort of a very condensed download. Sorry for that. All right. So next time you are struggling to get some alignment or get people on board with an idea or a direction to go, an experiment to try, start thinking about who, sort of those subtle distinctions of the group dynamic of, who has naturally more authority or more weight in coming to a conclusion, and therefore who you want to focus on. The person with the expertise, or the person who's got the most to lose or the most to gain, or the person that's able to contribute and support the idea most effectively. And these are all dimensions that will change the way you can approach conversations and supporting sort of your voice being heard in an appropriate and sort of natural way. I mean, in that sense, leadership has a lot to do with, so we, ideally as leaders, we're a little bit ahead of the curve, but fundamentally, we're already going in the direction that the consensus is willing to go. If I need to make a sharp right turn, obviously, it's going to be a lot harder to yield influence. And at some point, we'll come back to power, and just like whether you like it or not, we're going to make a left turn here. And so there's always a mix between how much we're able to do through enrolling, and when we're moving into the unpopular area of leveraging power. But that's sort of the extreme versions. In most of our day-to-day life, we organize around influence, not so much, hopefully, not so much around power. All right. Steph, you got a question?
Yeah, thank you for that. I was just curious if you have a recommendation or approach when your organization wants to move away from having decisions and influence coming from leadership, or becoming like having a very top-down kind of culture. It's your talking points made me think that we can lean on the other kind of categories of folks with influence, like folks with expertise and folks who have tenure. But aside from that, I don't know if you have any other recommendations.
No, actually, I mean, to some extent, we sort of expect that people that get promoted into management positions get there because of their expertise and their experience and their ability to actually make good decisions in an ideal world, when it's not some form of nepotism or old boys network kind of dynamics. And I mean, I was involved in a tech company who wanted to radically increase participation in decision making. And we definitely started with looking for the people who already have high informal authority. So not based on their position, but based on who they are, their abilities to manage relationships across departments, their expertise and knowledge, the trust that other people have in them. So they have a proven track record of being reliable, accountable, respectful, and finding those as champions and creating some way of explicitly acknowledging informal authority as a way of, like, the new way of working. I would be very strategic about who I would align with or enroll into my effort to de-emphasize org charts and the hierarchy, and find new ways and forms to make decisions that traditionally may have been made by a senior leader, or how to increase participation where senior leaders have to tolerate being quiet for longer than they're used to. And we have to create a vacuum in order for other people to step in. That's a really tough request. We don't naturally do that as humans.
I know, but that was great. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so we have a little bit of an umbrella, and the idea was really for us to create an experience of what it is like to tap into that I sort of vaguely refer to as sort of shared intelligence, shared consciousness of a team or a system. And it's something that culturally we don't really talk about, know about. So it feels quite radical. And here, let me just talk you a little bit through the tactical and practical before asking for a volunteer, where we can have a little case study and just see it in action. So let me share my screen here. Just for the purpose of explaining. So what we'll end up doing is we'll ask for some volunteers to step into these little figurines. If it may not be obvious, we have a head, some shoulders, some tippy toes sticking out, and this is sort of like little avatars that are stand-ins for people. Like before the pandemic, we've done this in person, and we've had people in a circle stand in. And these little figurines are representing either individuals or teams, subsystems within an organization and how they relate to each other. And then we'll have a little high-level conversation about the situation without mentioning any names or company names. It is Meetup, so we want to be very careful about confidentiality. And we'll figure out the simplest version of representing the dynamic. If there are conflicts, who is on one side or the other, and we're just focusing on the most important players, and find a simple way of representing this in this Google document. And I'll share my link here in a moment so everybody can hop onto the document and have access to move these people around. And then we'll ask for volunteers. And the invitation for the volunteers is something like, okay, there's, the red person and the blue person. Oh, actually, before I go there, I will use a piece of paper to capture privately who is representing whom. So let's imagine there's the team, the boss, and the boss's boss. There are three people, three aspects that are part of the dynamic. And I will secretly write down the designation of, red represents the boss, blue represents the team, yellow represents the boss's boss. So I'll do something random. The colors don't matter, obviously. And then we will ask for volunteers to step into the blue, the red, the yellow person, and get a sense in their body what it is like to be in relationship here. What is it like for red to be in touch, say, with blue, and they make some kind of a connection and turn to each other? And now what does it feel like to relate to blue? Now, on the surface of this, seems like a pretty ludicrous request. And I can guarantee you that just by function of being human, there will be some sense, some emotional resonance happening where you can suddenly make the distinction like, oh, I don't trust blue. I really want to I want to have a little distance. That's too close. I'm uncomfortable. I need more space. Or, oh, I want to come closer. I want to stand next to that person. And just by following that invitation and trusting that our nervous system knows how to do this, we will be able to surface some of the underlying dynamics of what it is like to be part of that organization, part of that team, or part of that management structure. And for the representatives, because we don't have enough information, it'll all feel fairly mysterious. And from experience, I can tell you, the person who is watching their case study unfold on this little Google document is generally amazed by how accurately it captures the relationship dynamic that's unfolding in day-to-day. And then we can use this format a little bit like a lab. We can do some tests. What is it like when you stand over here, go further away, we add another person. Maybe there's someone missing, someone with a stake in this dynamic, in its decision or conflict, has not yet been contributing or consulted. And then we can here, like in a lab, have little experiments and see what happens if we add additional people or additional information. And that'll change the dynamic. And then we can see. The goal is at the end of this exercise that we'll find a place where people are grounded and sort of in an appropriate way in their power, empowered, and feeling confident about being able to deliver what they're contributing, what they're asked for, what their role is, fulfill their role. And then we can take that information and use it as a sort of internal compass in real life. So if something plays out here and something needed to be acknowledged, or maybe there was an apology needed, we can find that out here. We can test that here. And then we have additional information and ideas for what we might try in the real world to see how it translates from the lab to 3D reality. Any questions? I know this is only marginally helpful, but like sort of this basic, what are we up to here? Wow, you're quiet. I don't know how to read that. All right, let me share this link to the Google document so you can hop on. And I'll stop sharing. We're back in the picture mode. So here comes the invitation that now here's an opportunity to try this out in a real life scenario in your work. what's happening at work that's kind of puzzling. Maybe this is very helpful when there's sort of chronic, persistent trouble, whether it's a conflict or people not getting along or missing goals and targets, but it's chronic, recurring. You've been trying to solve it for a while, or the organization has been at it for a while. And here we can practice, or we can use our lab experiment to see if there's something we can learn about what might make a difference here. So who's the courageous volunteer who's willing to offer up something without sharing information? We don't need a lot of background information. We certainly don't want names. We can be sort of a little bit abstract, but it needs to be real world. This does not work in the hypothetical. Anybody? It could be a simple question like, I've got tension with my manager or tension with this other manager over in the other department, and we're constantly butting heads, or challenges like that. By the way, this might be the time to stop the recording.